Phallocentric, the privileging of values associated with being masculine, hence the term phallus. A patriarchal society is habitually phallocentric. Feminist critics, psychoanalytic critics, and deconstructive critics variously use the term. However, the practitioners of deconstruction generally prefer the term phallocentric, which Derrida used to show how Western logocentric culture and language glorify the masculine gender. Paradox, an apparently self contradictory statement that on closer study reveals an underlying truth. For example, the conclusion of Donne's sonnet, Death be not proud. One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. In New Criticism, the term is used in a much broader context to refer to any shift from the ordinary use of language. This tendency prompted Clint Brook to claim in his book The Whale Wrote Earn that the language of poetry is the language of paradox. Deconstructive criticism ultimately is based on the paradoxical nature of language. Deconstructionists highlight the impossibility of arriving at a single definitive explanation of a literary text. Intertextuality. Julia Kristeva coined the term to refer to the interdependence of literary texts. All texts are interconnected with the ones before and will be connected to the ones that are to follow. She argues that literature is never produced in isolation, and the meaning of a text is therefore conditioned by other texts to which it responds and from which it. Hubris. The term refers to the excessive pride that leads to the tragic hero's fall. It is this pride or hubris that incites the protagonist to ignore a sound warning from a god or a wise person. He therefore transgresses moral laws and disregards human limitations, bringing about his own fall. For example, Macbeth in Shakespeare's play is considered a victim of hubris. Orientalism. In literary criticism, the term is intimately associated with Edward Said and refers to the historical and ideological methods through which Western discourses have constructed an erroneous image of the East, depicting the colonial other as subordinate and thus providing an intellectual foundation for imperial and economic exploitation. In Orientalism, Said asserts that it is a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. Michael Foucault, who examined the manner in which power is manifested and exercised through discourse, was a major influence on Said. Touchstone method. Matthew Arnold used the term in the study of poetry to suggest that works of great masters should be used as a touchstone, a basis of comparing the artistic worth of any literary work. Indeed, there can be no more useful help for discovering what poetry belongs to the class of the truly excellent and can therefore do us most good than to have always in one's mind lines and expressions of great masters and to apply them to as a touchstone to other poetry. Sublime. The ability of a literary work to raise the reader to a higher level of aesthetic experience. If a work is capable of achieving this, then the author is said to have touched the sublime. Longinus, the Greek scholar, is considered to have popularized the term through his treatise on the sublime. According to Longinus, the sublime is achieved when diction, thought, and literary devices are harmoniously arranged. Edmund Burke, in a philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and the beautiful, distinguished between the sublime and the beautiful by considering the sublime to be infinite. Kant, in his critique of judgment, also explored the concept of the sublime and concluded that if a work could evoke awe and ethically inspire the reader viewer, then it could be considered to have reached the sublime. Oxymoron, a figure of speech in which two opposite and seemingly contradictory words are juxtaposed for effect. For example, carefully, careless, regularly, irregular are example of oxymoron. The speech in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, where Romeo jests about love, has a number of oxymoron. Here's much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create, O heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well seeming pathos, a term used to refer to the capability of a work of art to make the reader feel pity, tenderness, or sorrow. Pathos is different from the feeling aroused by a tragedy because while tragic heroes are powerful characters who are at least partially responsible for their own fall, pathetic characters are usually helpless, innocent victims. For example, the death of Desdemona in Shakespeare's Othello or the death in Hardy's Days of D'Urberville is likely to arouse pathos. Pathetic fallacy. John Ruskin coined the term in modern painters to refer to the attributions of human feelings to inanimate objects, especially objects of nature. According to Ruskin, though such attributions can craft beautiful images, they are false and hence indicative of artistic weaknesses. Today, however, the term is no longer used in pejorative sense. Such phrases as the earth felt the wound, nature rejoiced are the example of pathetic fallacy. Signifier, signified. According to Ferdinand de Saussure, a sign is composed of signifier, a sound image, and a signified, the abstract concept that the sound image represents. The relation between the signifier and the signified is inseparable but arbitrary, a product of linguistic convention. Saussure argues that a sign has no positive qualities and acquires its meanings by virtue of being different from other signs in the same linguistic system. For example, pen acquires its meaning by virtue of being different from a pencil or eraser, and so on. Travesty. Travesty, a form of low burlesque that treats a serious subject in a frivolous, even grotesque manner. Generally, a subject, a particular work, or a literary convention is ridiculed in travesty. Cervantes' Don Quixote is a typical travesty. Soliloquy, a speech delivered by a character when no one else is present on stage that reveals to the audience his or her innermost thought. For example, Shakespeare uses a number of soliloquies to disclose Macbeth's inner conflict to war poets. Young poets who mostly fought as soldiers during the First World War and recorded their feelings and expressions. A few of them presented a romanticized version of war, but generally their poetry was dominated by a sense of perplexity, anger, and horror. Their poems conveyed the inner hopelessness and feeling of utter futility experienced by soldiers engaged in battle, as Wilfred Owen famously wrote, I am not concerned with poetry. My subject is war and the pity of war. The poetry is in the pity. Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, Isaac Rosenberg, Edmund Blundin, and sentimental novel, a form of 18th century fiction quite popular among middle class readers that espoused the view that moral behavior always receives its due reward in the end. It glorified emotions over reason and strongly believed in the inherent goodness of the human heart. It was not uncommon in such novel to find even the villain ultimately repenting and breaking down in tears. Richardson's Pamela or Virtue Rewarded is a typical sentimental novel about a servant girl who thwarted every attempt on her honor. Finally, the person attempting to ravish her is won by her goodness and marries her. Symbolism, a literary movement that flourished in France in the latter half of the 19th century. It developed largely in reaction to realism. Symbolist critics focused on the network of private symbols used by the author to express personal and intense emotions. Symbols are never employed to explicitly state the author's intention but only to hint at them. The work of French symbolists like Stephen Mallarmé, Arthur Rimbaud, Paul Valéry, and others greatly influenced the work of writers like W.B. Yeats, James Joyce, and T.S. Eliot. Curtal sonnet, a term coined by Gerard Manley Hopkins to refer to a curtailed form of sonnet that he invented. In this form, the number of lines is reduced from 14 to 10 and a half, which are divided into two stanzas of 6 and 4 lines, respectively, followed by a half line tail piece. Hopkins' piece is an example of curtain sonnet. Antagonist, the character in drama who oppose the hero or protagonist. A cruel antagonist is a villain, but the antagonist need not necessarily to be a villain. For example, Lago, the antagonist in Shakespeare's Othello, is a villain, but Donald Fairfrey, the antagonist in Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge, is not. Anagnorisis, a term used by Aristotle in Poetics to refer to the moment in a play when realization of the truth leads to knowledge. It is the point when ignorance is removed and reversal of fortune, peripetia, occurs. The moment in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, when Oedipus discovers that he himself has killed Laius, his father, and married Jocasta, his mother, is a classic example of anagnorisis. Anachronism, a reference to something not in keeping with its correct historical period. A striking example is Shakespeare's reference to the clock strikes in Julius Caesar, when such clocks were non existent in Rome of Caesar's time. Authors sometimes deliberately introduced anachronism in order to achieve a satirical effect. Anaphora, a figure of speech that refers to the repetition of words or phrases at the beginning of several successive clauses or sentences. For example, the lines from Shakespeare, as you like it, and so from hours to hour we ripe, and then from hours to hours we wrote, and thereby hangs a tale. In Tennyson's The Charge of Light Brigades, the lines, "There's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die." Adenitin, a type of hyperbole in which the exaggeration is magnified to such an extent that it refers to an impossibility. For example, I had walked 1,000,000 miles for one of your smiles. Some famous example of adenitin occur in Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. Closet drama. A drama, often in verse, that is meant to be read rather than performed. It also refers to plays that were originally written to be performed but never were. Some examples of closet drama are Milton's Samson Agonistes, Shelley's Cenci, and Swinburne Bothwell. Chiasmus, a figure of speech characterized by a reversal of grammatical order in phrases or clauses following each other for emphasis or emotional effect. The following are the example of chiasmus. Beauty is truth, truth is beauty. Fair is fall, and fall is fair. Cavalier poets. Cavalier poets refers to a group of English lyric poets active during the reign of Charles I. The term cavalier was used for the supporters of the king against Parliament. Ben Jonson was a great influence on them, and hence they were sometimes referred to as the sons of Ben or the tribe of Ben. The chief Cavalier writers were Thomas Carew, Richard Lovelace, and Sir John Suckling. The works of Cavalier poets had a light and witty moment. Their works typically celebrate the commonplace and even trivial aspect of daily life. Sucklings, why so pale and one fond lover is a typical example of cavalier poetry. Affective fallacy. The term first used by W.K. Wimsatt and Monorsi Worsley in 1946 in an essay that was later published in The Verbal Icon 1954. The term pointed out the mistake of evaluating a poem according to its effect on the reader. The theory was a direct reaction to I.A. Richards' claim in The Principle of Literary Criticism that the worth of literary work could be estimated through the psychological responses it created in readers. Later, the reader response critics have challenged affective fallacy in the 1970s by highlighting the ways in which the individual readers and the interpretive communities try to make sense of texts. What is ballad opera? An early form of a musical in which spoken dialogue is interspersed with music and songs. John Gay is credited to have invented the form with his The Beggar's Opera, a play with a large dose of music and songs. Eric and Wickstaff's Thomas and Sally and the Sheridans' Duena are some of the popular 18th century ballad opera. Bertolt Brecht experimented with the form to produce his famous The Three Penny Opera, a reworking of Gay's story and theme. What is antithesis? It is a figure of speech in which one word or idea is set against another opposite idea or word in a balanced form to emphasize the contrast. For example, man proposes, God disposes. To err is human, to forgive is divine. United we stand, divided we fall. The opening section of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities is an excellent example of antithesis. It was the best of time, it was the worst of time. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. Absence, presence. These words given a special literary meaning by Jacques Derrida when he used them to refer to the distinction between speech and writing. The spoken words demands the presence of the reader while the author is absent when a written work is being read. Derrida argues that Western culture is logocentric. Logocentric means one that privileges the spoken words over written language, and Derrida critiques the convention of privileging speech, which is presence, over writing, which is absence.
जब प्राइवेसी प्रोटेक्शन के बिना हो हैकर्स के पास अथॉरिटी, फिर किस बात की साइबर सिक्योरिटी? क्विक